Hello everyone, welcome to another artwork analysis. Now, I've talked a lot about characters and character in environments, but I haven't done an environment artist in quite a while, so I wanted to go into one of my favorites of all time, Theo Prins. Now, he might be best known for doing concept and promotional work for Guild Wars 2. So, if you've seen this type of style before, it is fantastic. And a big reason why is because with his style, you feel like you don't need to have a lot of details to say a lot. And his work is very impressionistic. It's sort of like a digital take to the old Claude Monet type of look. And it is just absolutely fantastic. Anyways, I want to talk about three things this time. It's going to be color movement, I'm going to be talking about saturation as well, and I want to talk about the values. And maybe a few things here and there. There's just a lot of things I can go about when it comes to Theo Prins' work. So first I want to talk about color movement. Now, not to say that it's very easy to execute what Theo does, but a big part of why his work can have so many different colors is because he makes sure he has deliberate ways to get you to look at a piece through where he places the colors. So it might be a bit confusing on how I put it there, but you notice how there's just so many wild colors. There's turquoise over here, there's aquas, there's reds, just just a lot of stuff. So what Theo does is quite simply he sort of gives a zone of where he puts a zone of where he wants you to look at, and then have the colors with the same or very similar hues and saturation in different areas in order to move your eyes. Okay, that sounded really freaking confusing as well. I'll just give you the examples. For instance, the red part over here is one zone, red part over here is another zone, and you could even say this zone over here in the back is a third zone, 1, 2, 3. It's because of the similarity of the tones and the colors, I mean, you end up looking at one, you go into distance number two, and then similarly number three. Let's make it a bit more obvious here. So this type of rhythm, now the subject matter as well creates this sort of movement. So you see how every one of these has a sail at the top. Maybe not this one, of course, to break it up a bit, but you see that because Theo is creating these similar colored zones, we end up with a very unified movement. Now, of course, this can work for every other zone as well. It's a bit more obvious for the other ones too. So in this case, look at the section with the turquoise and the aqua-ish color. So ignore the red over here. You see how this entire zone is sort of unified. If you were to zoom out a bit, the area is kind of all unified together. And that's a great thing because you don't want to have isolated instances of colors that aren't going to unify your piece. So again, these reds of these boats, I guess, these parts of boats, harbors, I guess, they create this nice movement, and also this creates a nice movement as well. So everything has a deliberate plan rather than making it seemingly random. Now, number two, I want to talk about saturation. Now, saturation is widely misunderstood because a lot of people kind of get into how to draw cartoon tutorials, how to draw anime tutorials. Saturation can be played around a lot in Impressionism because you do not want to have zones where it's the exact same color, exact same saturation, exact same value throughout. So if we were to zoom out here, we kind of think of it as these big zones because we can't see the details, the nuances. But once we start zooming in, look at how many things are going on over here. Now this is the foreground, which means that there can be a lot of details because technically speaking, our eyes would most likely be focused on the foreground here. So notice how there's so many things, so many colors going on, so many saturations of red, even so many textures too, right? So then once we go into the color over here, even though it still reads as a brownish red, there's a lot less going on, and also the saturation is a bit died down to imply that it's going into distance as well. So this again is a masterful use of color in order to create the sense of distance. Then once we go even farther, that's when the saturation goes really died down in order to create again a difference of distance. You do not want to have a case where everything in your piece, regardless of distance, will have the same saturation, same values. It's not going to work because it starts to conflict with each other. Our eyes cannot register super nuances like when we are in reality. So we, in pictorial form, in artwork, we kind of have to make a bit more obvious because in art, we cannot replicate every value, every saturation, every hue, which means that, again, Theo Prins masterfully kind of makes it a bit very obvious in order to create the sense of distance, if that makes sense. It's something I've talked about before where, again, our human eyes cannot, artwork cannot replicate what our human eyes can see, so we do have to exaggerate, quote-unquote, some elements in order to create the sense of distance, create the sense of atmosphere, etc. Now on to values as a final thing. So value-wise, if we were to bring down the saturation completely, you see that it reads very properly. And I want to make one key note. I don't really want to make everything too crazy because in a way, there's just so many nuances that it's hard to really explain every single thing, but there is one major movement that really matters here, and it's the fact that the foreground of the values, notice the contrast between the sails and the reddish part, or whatever, the darker part, I guess. It's a very high contrast. Now, in the distance, this one, it's a bit closer together, you might notice. The reason why is, again, when we are going into distance, there's going to be less contrast, which means there's less contrast of colors, hues rather, there's less contrast of saturation, and Theo Prins also does it with values. And then when you get into the far distance, that's when it gets really subtle. There might be little patches of lights here and there. You might see, gonna just, yep, right here. Might be a little bit of contrast here and there to break up the bigger shapes, but in general, it is not comparable to just how the contrast of the sails and the darker parts are. So, again, just, it's sort of like having a triple threat. 3 different insurances to ensure that your viewers will understand the distance, the epicness of this piece. Again, much easier said than done, and obviously he does it in a certain style that other people might not do, which is Impressionism, but it's something to behold, and I really suggest you study Theo Prins' work, especially if you're into environments. Anyways, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.